Stop me, Madam President, if the story I'm about to tell sounds familiar. The Speaker of the House, the Democratic leader, summoned President Trump's representatives to the Capitol. They meet for a long while. The Democrats emerge saying they permitted a few millimeters of progress, but a deal is still far off, leaving millions of Americans in the lurch. And they continue to push their $3 trillion wish list that even their own Democratic colleagues brushed off as absurd. We've had variations on this theme daily for more than a week now. Yesterday, the Speaker of the House called their far-left proposal quite a well-developed strategic plan. But even members of our own caucus know that's not true. Back when the Speaker's wish list was rammed through the House, one Democratic member came right out and said the so-called HEROES Act, quote, isn't a plan, it's a wish list. Another said that members of her caucus had taken the bill as, quote, an opportunity to make political statements that go far beyond pandemic relief and has no chance at becoming law. Others said it was not focused and, quote, partisan gamesmanship. These are Democrats, I'm quoting. Even the Speaker's own rank and file know it's comical to say your strategic plan for COVID-19 involves sending taxpayer checks to people here illegally, paying people more not to work than essential workers earn by working, soil health programs, so-called environmental justice grants, and a massive tax cut aimed directly at wealthy people in New York and California. That last point needs special attention. Now, in ordinary negotiations, members of Congress like to bring things home for their core supporters. But it's a little too on the nose for the Speaker from San Francisco and the Democratic leader from New York City to be holding up $1 trillion in emergency aid for the entire country unless they get big tax breaks for millionaires in their hometowns. Economists across the political spectrum say this demand of theirs is a bad idea. 94% of the benefit would flow to people who make north of $200,000. In the words of one progressive economist who ought to be on their side, quote, this is not a good idea. It would not help the economy heal, and it would not benefit the people who need help. But my friends in the Democratic leadership are not deterred. More than a week into these talks, they're still threatening to block any and all relief for struggling people unless big city penthouses get these tax cuts. The Democratic leader said just yesterday he's still holding out for this. Now, this isn't the only bad policy they're hung up on. The Speaker and the Democratic leader continue to insist that federal unemployment assistance should pay people more not to work than the essential workers who kept working. Let me say that again. The Democratic position has been that these millions of laid-off people should get nothing unless they get a higher salary than the people who are still working. This isn't just bad economics. If you're trying to reopen a country, it's also just simply unfair in the simplest terms. Republicans want to keep providing some supplemental federal unemployment. We just don't think it's remotely fair for the federal government to tax essential workers who kept working every day so that Uncle Sam can pay their neighbors a higher salary to stay home. Let me say that again. We just don't think it's remotely fair for the federal government to tax essential workers who kept working every day so Uncle Sam can pay their neighbors a higher salary to stay home. Outside of the Democratic leader and the Speaker of the House, even Democrats concede it's a bit upside down to pay people more not to work. Last week, the House Democratic Majority Leader said, quote, it's not just $600 or bust. Our colleague, the senior senator from Maryland, has said, quote, we certainly understand we don't want to have higher benefits than what somebody can make working. And just yesterday, the senior senator from West Virginia stated plainly that Speaker Pelosi's position was untenable. Quote, I don't think we're going to stay at the 600. Let's bear in mind even 200 would be 8 times what Democrats put in place with unified control of the government during the last crisis in 2009. It's unthinkable they will hold every bit of relief hostage unless we land back at $600 and pay workers a bonus if they do not help to reopen our country. Maybe the Speaker and the Democratic leader will get the memo from their colleagues sometime soon. And then there's Democrats' demand for $1 trillion more to hand out to state and local governments, even though they've only spent one-fourth of the money we sent them back in March. Yesterday, I received an urgent letter from the city of Malibu, California. And I promise, I'm not making this up. They asked Congress for hundreds of billions of dollars for state and local government because they have had to delay their conversion to an all-electric city fleet. I guess that's an emergency in Malibu when they can't keep buying brand new electric cars as quickly as they would like. Well, this emergency is hitting most of America very differently. My constituents in Kentucky have bigger problems. They need actual relief, straight to struggling families, and frankly, they need it yesterday. Not a $1 trillion slush fund for bureaucrats that haven't spent what we sent them back in March. Those are just some of the fantasy items that are in the Democrats' demands. I haven't even gotten to all the important things they left out. Their bill costs 3 times as much as Senate Republicans' HEALS Act, but they skip over major serious things that we took care of. Democrats propose fewer resources than Republicans for the fund to help schools reopen safely. Democrats completely shortchanged the successful Collins-Rubio Paycheck Protection Program, where our bill would have funded a whole second round. Democrats have no real equivalent to our proposals to strengthen domestic supply chains for PPE and critical resources. And they propose no legal protections at all for the doctors and nurses who fought this unknown enemy, or the schools, universities, churches, and businesses trying to reopen. Apparently, those soil health experiments and diversity initiatives didn't leave enough room for the critical policies that would actually help the country. But remember, our Democratic colleagues told us from the beginning their goal was never a targeted plan for COVID-19. In March, one of the Speaker's top lieutenants said Democrats should view this deadly disease and mass unemployment as, quote, a tremendous opportunity to restructure things to fit our vision. Speaker Pelosi herself called this crisis a wonderful opportunity. And it's clear they view it that way, because while Americans are struggling, the Democratic leaders have moved about 1 inch in 8 days. For the sake of the millions and millions who need more help, let's hope they decide to get serious